I was tired of the city, tired of the noise, the constant movement, the feeling of being trapped in a place where everything happened too fast. I needed a break, and the cabin seemed like the perfect place. I found it online. A small wooden place deep in the woods, far from people, far from everything. The listing said it had no electricity, no running water, just a wood stove and a well outside. That was exactly what I wanted. A few days of silence, of stillness, of being completely alone. The drive took longer than expected. The roads became narrow, twisting through the forest, and my GPS lost signal miles before I reached the cabin. I had to rely on a printed map, which felt almost ridiculous, but I managed. The place looked exactly like the pictures: small, weathered wood, a steeply pitched roof, a single window in the front. The trees surrounded it so closely that it almost felt like they were pressing in. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. The furniture was simple: a small table, a couple of chairs, a narrow bed against the far wall. The wood stove sat in the corner, cold and empty. A few shelves held canned food, a couple of old books. There was a lantern on the table, its glass covered in a thin layer of dust. I set my bag down and took a deep breath. It was quiet, so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. No hum of distant traffic, no voices, no footsteps, just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. The first night was uneventful. I lit a fire in the stove, ate a can of beans, and read one of the old books by lantern light. I fell asleep to the sound of the wind moving through the trees, and for the first time in months, I felt at peace. The second day, I explored the area. There was a small path behind the cabin, leading deeper into the woods. I followed it for a while, taking in the stillness, the way the sunlight barely reached the forest floor. I found a stream about half a mile away, its water clear and cold. I filled a bottle and sat for a while, listening to the water move over the rocks. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sky had started to darken. I lit another fire, made some food, and sat by the window, looking out at the trees. That's when I noticed something strange. The ground outside was covered in dead leaves. When I arrived, my footprints had been the only ones visible. But now there were more. They were faint, barely visible in the fading light, but they were there. Tracks leading from the edge of the trees to the front of the cabin, stopping just short of the porch. I told myself it was nothing, maybe an animal, maybe the wind had shifted the leaves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I locked the door, something I hadn't bothered to do the night before, and went to bed. Sleep didn't come easily. Every small noise made me tense. The wind outside, the creak of the cabin, the distant sound of branches snapping. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding. I didn't know why at first. Then I realized the fire had burned low, casting only the faintest glow. And in the dim light, I could see something through the window, a shape just outside, standing at the edge of the trees. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My eyes stayed locked on the figure, my brain struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Then slowly it moved, not towards the cabin, not away, just a step to the side, like it was adjusting its position. Watching, I grabbed the knife from my bag. My hands were shaking. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, my mind playing games with me, but I knew it wasn't. The figure stayed there for what felt like hours. Then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into the trees. I didn't sleep after that. I kept the knife in my hand, my back pressed against the wall, my eyes on the window. The fire died completely, and I sat there in the dark, listening. Morning came slowly. When the first light crept through the trees, I forced myself to move. I opened the door carefully, stepping onto the porch. The footprints were still there, but now they were closer, too close. I packed my bag in minutes. I didn't care that I had planned to stay longer. I didn't care about the money I had paid for the cabin. I just needed to leave. The drive back felt longer than the drive in. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something on the road behind me. The trees felt taller, the forest darker. When I finally reached the highway, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I never told anyone about what happened. Felt pointless. What would I even say? That I saw a shape in the woods? That I felt watched? That there were footprints where there shouldn't have been? I still don't know who or what was out there that night, but I know one thing for certain. I will never go back. I don't know where to start, but I guess I should say that I never should have gone up there alone. It wasn't even my idea. My buddy, James, had booked the cabin for a weekend getaway, but he bailed last minute. Work emergency, he said. I had already taken time off, packed, and driven halfway there when he called. He told me to go anyway, enjoy the quiet, relax. No service up there, but you'll be fine. Figured, why not? I could use the break. The cabin was deep in the woods, far from any main roads. It was one of those old wooden places people rent out when they want to disconnect. No Wi-Fi, no electricity beyond a backup generator that ran on a timer, no plumbing, just a well out back. It sounded like hell to some people, but I didn't mind. A couple of days in the quiet sounded good. The drive took longer than I thought. The last stretch was a narrow dirt road barely wide enough for my truck. Thick trees loomed on both sides, and the deeper I went, the darker it seemed to get. The sun was still up, but the trees blocked most of it, casting long shadows that flickered across my windshield. When I reached the cabin, I parked and got out. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. The cabin itself was small, just a single floor with a loft above. The wood looked old, the kind that had been there for decades, maybe longer. There was a porch with a single rocking chair, a fire pit out front, and a small shed off to the side. It looked abandoned, but I had the keys, and the inside was clean enough. I settled in, putting my bags down and starting the generator. It sputtered to life, giving me just enough power for some light. There was a wood stove for heat, and the fireplace had a neat stack of logs beside it. I found some canned food in the kitchen, left by the owners, and ate straight from the can. The silence was nice at first, just the sound of wind in the trees and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. By the time night fell, the quiet wasn't so comforting. The generator cut off at 9, just like the instructions said it would, leaving me in complete darkness except for the weak glow of my flashlight. I wasn't tired, but there wasn't much to do. I sat in the chair by the fire, listening to the woods outside. Every now and then, I heard rustling, but that was normal. Animals moved through the trees all the time. Then something heavy moved outside. It wasn't the skittering of a raccoon or the light steps of a deer. It was deliberate, slow, like boots crunching on dead leaves. I held my breath, listening. The fire crackled beside me, the only other sound in the room. Then the footsteps stopped. I waited, heart pounding. Nothing. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe a bear, maybe just the house shifting. I locked the door just in case and went to bed in the loft, sleeping with my flashlight within reach. I woke up sometime in the night. I didn't know why at first, but then I heard it again. The sound of footsteps. They were closer now, just outside the cabin. I didn't move. The floorboards on the porch creaked. I gripped the flashlight, barely breathing. The door was locked, but I wasn't sure how strong it was. If someone really wanted in, they could probably force it open. My mind raced through possibilities, hunters maybe, or some lost hiker looking for shelter. But they would have called out, wouldn't they? Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it. I checked outside, no footprints, no signs of anyone being there. Maybe it had been a deer, something heavy stepping onto the porch. The woods played tricks on people, I knew that. I shook it off and decided to go for a walk to clear my head. There was a trail behind the cabin that led up to a small clearing with a view of the valley below. I followed it, letting the cold air wake me up. The hike wasn't long, maybe half a mile, but it was steep. When I reached the top, I stood there for a while, just taking it in. The trees stretched for miles, unbroken except for the distant shimmer of a lake. That's when I noticed something strange. Far below, near where the cabin should have been, I saw movement. A figure. It was too far to see clearly, but they were walking near the treeline, just past the clearing around the cabin. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they were looking for something. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I wasn't alone out here. I stayed still, watching. The figure moved out of sight, swallowed by the trees. I waited, but they didn't come back. I walked back down, faster this time, heart hammering. When I reached the cabin, I checked the area. Nothing seemed out of place. The door was still locked, my truck untouched, but the feeling didn't leave me. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching. The day passed in a blur. I kept expecting to see movement in the trees, but nothing came. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I decided to leave first thing in the morning, cut the trip short. Whatever peace I had been looking for was gone. That night, I barricaded the door with the chair and sat by the fire again, listening. I didn't even try to sleep. Then, just past midnight, I heard it. The footsteps. They were back, slower this time, circling the cabin. My pulse pounded in my ears. The floorboards on the porch groaned under the weight of something or someone heavy. Then came the sound of the doorknob turning. I gripped the fire poker, barely breathing. The knob rattled again, harder this time. Then silence. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing. I sat there, waiting for morning. When the first light broke through the trees, I grabbed my keys and left. I didn't even pack. I just got in the truck and drove, glancing in the rearview mirror the whole way. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But I know I wasn't alone in those woods. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind you get in the city, where you still hear the hum of distant traffic, the occasional siren, the low murmur of people. This was a thick, pressing silence, like the woods themselves had swallowed up all the sound. It sat heavy on my ears, making my own breath feel too loud. I had rented the cabin for a weekend. Nothing fancy, just an old structure in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick trees and a narrow dirt road that barely passed for a driveway. I wanted to get away for a bit, clear my head, maybe go hiking. The listing said the place had a generator, a wood stove, and a working well. That was enough for me. The drive up had been uneventful, just miles of winding roads and tall pines. I hadn't seen another car for a long time before turning onto the path that led to the cabin. The place itself looked exactly like the pictures, small, weathered, with a porch that sagged slightly. The windows were dark, empty. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking under my weight. It smelled old, not musty, just aged, like wood that had soaked up decades of fires, dust, and rain. The furniture was basic: a couch, a table, a couple of chairs, a fireplace with a stack of split logs beside it. There was a bedroom in the back with a narrow bed and a single nightstand. The bathroom was small but functional. No shower, just a sink and a toilet. The well outside had a hand pump. I walked through the place, testing the lights. The generator groaned to life when I flipped the switch, and a single bulb flickered on in the kitchen. Dim but enough. Satisfied, I brought my bags inside and locked the door behind me. Not that I expected anyone out here, but still. Habit. I spent the first hour getting settled, stacking firewood near the stove, checking the water, making sure my phone had at least some signal. Didn't. No surprise there. I had a radio, though, just in case. The first night was quiet. I sat on the porch with a beer, listening to the faint rustle of the trees. No animals, no wind, just the stillness of the forest. When I finally went to bed, I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up to a sound, a dull, distant thud, not close, somewhere outside. I sat up, listening. Nothing. Probably an animal knocking something over. A bear, maybe. I had seen signs warning about them on the drive up. I checked my watch, 2:34 a.m. I got up, grabbed the flashlight, and walked to the front door. The night was thick, pitch black beyond the weak glow of the porch light. I shone the flashlight over the yard, toward the tree line. Nothing. The trees stood still, unmoving. No wind. No animals. I stepped back inside and locked the door again, shaking my head. Probably just my imagination. The woods had a way of playing tricks on you. I climbed back into bed and eventually drifted off. The next morning, I found something strange. Near the edge of the tree line, the dirt had been disturbed. A long, uneven drag mark cut through the ground, leading deeper into the woods, like something heavy had been pulled away from the cabin. I frowned, crouching down. It wasn't an animal. No tracks, no prints, just that long, smooth groove in the dirt. I followed it a few feet before it disappeared into the undergrowth. The trees were too dense to see where it led. Something about it made my skin crawl. I stood up, brushing the dirt off my hands. Whatever it was gone now. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a fallen tree limb that had slid down the hill or something. I forced myself to shake it off and went back inside to make breakfast. The day passed uneventfully. I went for a hike, made lunch, sat by the fire with a book. As the sun started to set, I found myself glancing at the trees more often than before. I told myself I wasn't nervous, but I locked the door again that night, double-checking the latch. The second night, I woke up again. This time, the sound was closer. A dull, rhythmic thudding. Steady. Pounding. I sat up, heart hammering. It sounded like it was coming from just outside the cabin. I grabbed the flashlight again, hands trembling slightly as I made my way to the window. I pressed my face to the glass, peering outside. The porch light flickered slightly, casting a dim glow over the yard. Nothing. I stood there for a long time, waiting, listening. The sound had stopped. The trees stood still. My own reflection stared back at me from the window, pale and tense. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I found something new. Near the porch steps, the dirt had been disturbed again. Another long drag mark, leading toward the woods. My stomach twisted as I stared at it. It was closer this time. I thought about leaving, packing up, driving back to town, calling it a failed trip. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Just nerves. The woods were unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things made people uneasy. That night, I kept the fire going. I sat in the living room, listening, staring at the door. My body was tense, every sound making my pulse jump. The night stretched on, long and silent. Then, just past 3, the pounding started again. Louder this time, right against the cabin. A slow, heavy thud against the walls. Steady, rhythmic. I grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the front door. The pounding stopped. I waited, heart hammering, then flicked the light on and swung the door open. Nothing, just the trees and the stillness of the night. The porch light flickered again. I took a deep breath, stepped back inside, and locked the door. The next morning, I packed my bags. I didn't care if I was being paranoid anymore. Something wasn't right. As I loaded up the car, I glanced toward the woods one last time. The drag marks were fresh, leading from my porch steps, right up to my door. I didn't look back as I drove away. I never liked the woods. Something about the endless trees, the way they swallowed the sky and left you feeling so small, always made me uneasy. But when my friend Mark offered me his family's old hunting cabin for the weekend, I accepted. I needed the break. Work had been killing me, and the thought of a quiet weekend alone, no emails, no city noise, sounded perfect. The drive took longer than expected. The roads twisted through the forest, getting narrower the deeper I went. My GPS lost service an hour in, leaving me to rely on the barely legible directions Mark had scrawled on a napkin. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was dipping below the trees, casting long shadows over the dirt clearing. The cabin was older than I expected. The wood was dark, worn from years of weather. It was small, just one room with a tiny porch and a rusted-out fire pit a few feet away. A single window faced the clearing, and another, smaller one was near the back. It wasn't much, but it would do. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and old wood. The furniture was sparse. A rickety wooden chair, a tiny table, and a narrow bed covered in a thin, moth-eaten blanket. Against one wall was a wood-burning stove, the only source of heat. I spent the first hour unpacking. I had brought enough food and water for the weekend, plus a small battery-powered lantern since Mark had warned me the generator was unreliable. After checking my phone, no service, of course. I settled in, cooking a can of soup over the stove and listening to the sounds outside. The wind through the trees, the occasional rustling of leaves. Normal forest noises. I told myself to relax. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside felt magnified in the silence. Something skittered across the roof at one point, probably a raccoon, but I still bolted upright, heart pounding. I reminded myself that I was alone out here. No one knew I was here. That thought didn't make me feel better. The next morning, I woke up groggy, but determined to enjoy the day. I spent the afternoon hiking a nearby trail, making sure to stick close to familiar landmarks. The forest was dense, the trees packed tightly together. More than once, I had the strange feeling that I was being watched. But every time I turned around, there was nothing but trees. Just paranoia, I told myself. Being alone in the woods plays tricks on your mind. When I returned to the cabin, something felt off. The door was closed, just as I'd left it, but there were fresh footprints in the dirt outside. My footprints were there, sure, but these were different, bigger, and they led right up to the porch. I stood frozen for a long moment, heart hammering in my chest. There was no one else out here. The nearest town was miles away, and Mark had specifically told me that the cabin was isolated. Slowly, I stepped onto the porch, scanning the area. Nothing, just trees and silence. I reached for the door, hesitating before pushing it open. The inside looked the same. My bag was where I had left it. The blankets on the bed were untouched, but something felt wrong. The air felt different. I locked the door that night. I even wedged a chair under the doorknob just in case. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time the wind picked up, I stiffened. The woods weren't peaceful anymore. They were too quiet, like they were holding their breath. Sometime after midnight, I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak from the porch. My body went rigid. It wasn't the wind. It was footsteps. I held my breath, straining to hear. Another creak. Someone was out there, standing on my porch. I reached for my flashlight, slowly, careful not to make a sound. My fingers shook as I switched it on, pointing it toward the window. Nothing. I stayed like that for hours, flashlight clenched in my hand, every muscle locked. I didn't sleep. By morning, the footprints were back. Clearer this time. They circled the cabin, pausing at the window at the door. Someone had been watching me. I packed my things in minutes. I wasn't going to wait around to find out who or what was out there. I loaded my bag into the car, forcing myself to stay calm, to move slowly. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was panicking. The drive back felt longer. The roads twisted endlessly, the trees closing in on me. Every so often, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the tree line. I never saw anyone. When I finally reached the main road, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I drove straight home, not stopping once. I told Mark what happened. He laughed at first, but when I showed him the pictures of the footprints, his face went pale. "No one should have been out there," he said. "That place has been abandoned for years." He never offered me the cabin again. I never asked. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I had opened the door that night. If I had shined the flashlight out just a little further. I don't think I want to know.